Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RDNA video we're going to be discussing as well as analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. Hopefully you're having an amazing day. We have a ton of stuff to get through in today's video. I'm going to start things out though with RDNA 2, specifically Sienna Cichlid and AMD's Navy Flounder. These code names have been known for some time and have often been associated with Nave 21 and 22, Navy Flounder being 22. And now we actually have confirmation of sorts from AMD themselves thanks to ROCm developer tools. The source code actually confirms these code names. Now it's worth noting that the code names themselves aren't chosen for a specific reason. Basically, they're kind of like a word generator, and that's pretty much the way that AMD chooses to go with. So what we kind of think at this point then is that Dim Grey Cavefish is going to be Nave 23, which is going to be the lower end GPUs, of course, in the stack, with Nave 21 being the highest end SKUs. There are still a ton of questions that we have as we are going into this, despite the fact that I've literally leaked photos of these cards at this point, and released quite a bit of information of the performance targets and specs of the card. Ultimately, there are still a ton of questions as to not only the feature set, but official performance of these GPUs. We know, of course, that they will be officially announced at the end of next month, and frankly, I am super duper happy about that. I think that it's about bloody time, honestly, that AMD actually have high-end GPUs. It seems oh so long ago that AMD were competing in the high-end graphics arena, so I'm definitely happy about this. I think that we need competition, quite frankly, to spur on the market. And I also think that it's going to be even more critical, given, of course, the fact that the next generation consoles are looking to be so appealing. I think more choice in the market is only ever a good thing. But let's move on from that to a quick thing from Intel, and that is Alder Lake S. You are possibly aware that Alder Lake is going to be the successor to Rocket Lake. So we currently have Comet Lake, then it goes Rocket Lake, and then after that Alder Lake. And this is going to be an interesting thing because Rocket Lake is said to not just be a Skylake core, it's some type of enhanced architecture, but I'm hearing mixed things. A couple of folks have told me that AMD definitely have them beat with the Zen 3 architecture, but someone else recently has told me that they're not certain about this because it seems Rocket Lake is quite mysterious. I personally believe that AMD are going to have a very good chance to fight Rocket Lake, but ultimately I think it's going to be Alder Lake onwards, which is probably going to be Intel really bringing the fight to AMD, because obviously Alder Lake is an entirely different architecture, and we've discussed it quite a few times at this point. It is going to be on the 10nm super thin process, and is going to be hybrid. So, of course, Intel have confirmed it's a big/small core design, which is definitely very different to what you would associate normally with, like, well, you know, desktop. But with this said, we now have a tiny bit of information for this, and that is thanks to the power supply unit test plans. Credit to Momomo on Twitter for this discovery. These are essentially documents which describe the power supply voltage recommendations of the upcoming or current platforms from Intel. There's not a huge amount to discern here, other than they seem a little more strict than with the older architectures, let's say with the 9th generation or 8th generation platforms. Even so, it's kind of interesting that we finally have this. We know that Intel are internally testing these at this point. I won't lie, while I'm always excited for future CPUs and innovation, I'm mostly interested to see how the big/small architecture does translate to desktop. Intel have mentioned that they will be working very closely with Microsoft on this and obviously other OSs. So I'm just curious to see how all of that kind of comes together with different workloads and do testing. Just because more of the geeky side of me than the actual side of me that just wants cool performance. But either way, I think that Alder Lake will be a very compelling platform. The next couple of months from AMD, of course, will just be ridiculous because of Zen 3 finally being announced, and we'll finally see performance numbers for the Ryzen 5000 series. That's what I'm hearing it's being called. I mean, it could be called the 4000 series, but I think it's very likely that the information that we've received, and I leaked, that they want parity between the next generation APUs and of course the Zen 3 based desktop does make sense. And I think that AMD will steal the show. Whether Rocket Lake is going to be compelling for gaming workloads, we don't know, as of course Rocket Lake is rumoured to only be up to the 8 core mark. Just very off topic for a second, I will say the naming schemes of Intel's processors sometimes kind of baffles me, and I don't just mean the 11th generation naming schemes, but just in terms of like code names. You would think that Comet Lake would be the architecture which would be after Rocket Lake, because you kind of take a rocket to get to the comet or something. I don't know. It's just kind of baffling to me. Very quick piece of gaming news. Konami have done the Konami thing and made a surprise announcement. We actually now have confirmation of 3 Metal Gear games, which are now on GOG. So we have Metal Gear Solid 2. Actually, I wouldn't mind replaying that, to be fair. Metal Gear Solid and the original Metal Gear. You may be familiar with the fact that I have actually leaked the fact that there were ports of these games coming. I still believe that we will be having Metal Gear Solid 3 and 4 as well. And furthermore, Metal Gear Solid is apparently getting remastered. I'm still hearing that. I've asked my source and they are still confident that Metal Gear Solid remaster is happening. I will stress, of course, that these announcements are probably going to be happening at different times. Honestly, I'm still very skeptical that we will be seeing Metal Gear Solid remastered remake, this year. I think that it's going to probably be next year. But then again, who knows? Maybe they'll release a teaser or something like that towards the console's final launch date, but I suspect it's probably going to be next year at this point. I've said that in the original video, that at the end of the day, the timings are completely and utterly up in the air. So it's cool, though, that we get to actually play the original games. It's been... I can't even think the last time I actually played Metal Gear Solid 1. I think it might have been, like, on my PS2 to test out the texture smoothing option or something like that, which gives you an idea of how long ago that was. And Metal Gear Solid 2... I played for it twice on the PS2, and then I had it on the Xbox. I think it was called Substance. Yeah, I think it was the Substance version on the Xbox. So I think I played for it once on the Xbox as well. The original Xbox, not via back compatibility. So I'm kind of hyped. Furthermore, a very small thing, a quite well-known leaker, by the name of the Drunk Cat, has also stated that he believes on Twitter that there will be more announcements from Konami soon. I don't know if this is in reference to Metal Gear Solid or whether this is an entirely different property from them. Personally, I would love for Konami to announce a new Castlevania. I don't know if it would be the same now since Igarashi has left. Personally, I would love, though, a new Castlevania. I'm going to probably annoy people by saying that I actually quite liked even Lord of Shadows. Lord of Shadows 2, not so much, but Lord of Shadows 1, yeah, I thought it was pretty damn cool. So I wouldn't be against it. I mean, I actually even quite liked Lament of Innocence and... Oh gosh, I can't remember the other 3D one that was on the PS2. I know it was Lament of Innocence, and there was another one, and it's going to really annoy me, but I'll Google it later. But anyway, yeah, so hopefully there'll be some more IPs from Konami, because they actually do have, of course, a lot of IPs that have been locked in. And I would love for Konami to just start doing their thing again. Personally, I would love it. Like, even my rumour aside, I would love for them to start making games, because it's not just, Metal Gear Solid and Castlevania that Konami have access to. There are tons of cool IPs that I would love for them to start releasing for the next generation consoles. So with any luck, we will start to see that, because I think people would be super hyped. Also, while we're on the subject of games, I'll just add this in as a quick freebie. Final Fantasy 16 apparently won't have a release super far into the future. This is according to Jason Schreier, who now is working over at Bloomberg. He was speaking on the Triple Click podcast. Again, like other things, this will be linked in the video description. And he said, and I quote, "I've heard from people who are familiar with the game's development that it's actually been in development for at least 4 years in some capacity. So it's coming sooner than people think." Obviously, this title has been revealed for the PlayStation 5 at the recent event, but we will also allegedly see it on the PC as well. It's kind of interesting because Eurogamer were pressing Square and asking if it was going to come to the Xbox, and there were kind of hints that it would, but it would first of all be a PlayStation kind of launch game, and who the hell knows at this point. This is one of the issues I have with, kind of launch window exclusivities, because they don't admit it for obvious reasons, and I think it ends up frustrating people in the long run. So I'd prefer if companies were just upfront about this. It's like I said in yesterday's video, I really wish we lived in this, world where you could ask a company, "Hey, are you guys working on this?" and they would just tell you yes or no. Because I think it can be quite frustrating, to be honest, to have a game that's just, or even a console, at some points, that is literally being worked on, and then 5 minutes later, you ask them with literal screenshots, "Nope, we're not working on this, this is totally fake," then they'll, 5 minutes later, announce the damn thing on social media, like, what, why? Anyhow, and now let's move over to perhaps the most requested topic of the day. In fact, not even perhaps, definitely. And that is data compression for the PlayStation 5. As you are likely aware by now, both next-generation consoles contain an SSD, with the PS5s being 5.5 for raw speed, that is uncompressed data, but realistically, in real-world scenarios, they believe it hits about 8 to 9 gigabytes per second with compressed data. Now, compressed data is the normal for the next generation, and even this generation, because it has several benefits. The first is that it transfers quicker because, well, it's compressed. And the second is that it takes up less space. The problem is, with the previous generation, while data certainly was compressed, it was being decompressed by the CPU, which meant loading screens, you could more heavily compress the data, but during gameplay, because it was the CPU handling this, if you basically had a really high level of compression, you were just eating the CPU alive, and the CPU kind of has to do other things like physics and gameplay. So ultimately there had to be this balancing act of, well, we kind of need to tweak this, we don't want to over compress, and of course when you don't compress data as much, you limit the throughput. And this is particularly true given the speed of the current generation drives, that is the hard drives on both of them. Well, the technical term is it sucks. I mean, it really does. They're just not fast. They're not fast compared to a decent PC hard drive, but Compare them to the SSDs that are in like the next gen consoles, and they're dreadful. They're so slow. And it's not just the raw transfer speed, as we've discussed umpteen and one times at this point, but it's also the latency of data access. If you want more information on this, by the way, you can check out my how SSDs will change everything. I think it was console SSDs will change everything, something like that. I'll try to remember to link it in the video description. So this 8 to 9 gigabytes figure is actually the average compression ratio of games. Mark Cerny went over this rather extensively in the Road to PS5 event. So he basically, and Sony were basically taking the figure about 1.5 to 1. That is great, it's pretty decent, but there is still room for improvement on that, and this is where we have to go enter the Kraken. And Oodle have actually created a couple of tools, Oodle Kraken and Oodle Texture. Now, it is imperative to realise a few things. A, this is not the first time that we have seen discussion of Oodle Texture and the company actually in general. It is made by Rad Game Tools. I'm going to read out some of the information which has been plonked on a blog by the company. You can check it out. I'll link it, of course, in the description. The second thing is that they create cross-platform tools. And the next thing as well is that Microsoft too have their own stuff. I don't want to turn this into an Xbox versus PlayStation 5 thing because it's way outside the scope of this news video. Microsoft have their own stuff like BC Pack and obviously the Velocity architecture, sampler feedback, but Sony kind of have their own version of that too. It becomes really complicated. So instead, I'm just going to focus on Oodle and Oodle Kraken and Oodle Texture. Again, this is not platform specific because they do actually make tools as well for Xbox, but the one thing Sony have done here is they've licensed this software to any developer working on either the PS4 or the PS5, and obviously Sony's hardware does natively support Kraken as well. Anyway, with Kraken, it basically can decompress this data on hardware, which is obviously much faster than software. If it was done in software, again, we would be relying on our friend and buddy, the CPU. So what does all of this mean? Well, Kraken will, and this is with both of them together, will basically supercharge your, that is with Oodle, so that's Oodle Texture, as well as Oodle Kraken. It will supercharge the performance of the PlayStation 5. That's the marketing buzz anyway. Up to 17.38 gigabytes per second of transfer speeds, which is, well, let's just use the word pretty nippy. That's pretty damn fast. There are a few things to take into consideration. Firstly, some textures or some data does not compress as well. And furthermore, that figure is actually with textures. Again, not all data is textures. Still, you will get the benefit of Kraken. And again, you can see the performance metrics that they're listing here. So, it's quite nice actually that they've given these metrics so well. So for example, zip, it's about 0.6, it's about 1.64 to 1. With Kraken, it's about 1.82 to 1. With zip and with Oodle Texture, it's 2.69 to 1. And with Kraken plus Oodle Texture, it's about 3.16 to 1, Austin 316, if you prefer. So definitely speaking, this is huge for games of the future. Obviously, compressing and decompressing data is incredibly important. And it's worth noting that they do very, very specifically state that not all games at the moment will take advantage of this. For launch, this will probably start trickling its way down to future games, so maybe in a year or two we will see more games work around this. When it comes to compression, it's essentially looking for patterns, and then obviously the goal is to compress the data where it can to squeeze the data down. And given SSDs for the PlayStation 5 essentially improve the ability to pull more data with higher quality assets into memory, because it means that you don't really need to worry so much, because by the time your character turns like 180 degrees, it's going to take, let's say, a third of a second, half a second for your character to turn, depending on the game. By that point, you could have already streamed in several gigabytes of data, which means you don't need to worry about having data from 2 or 3 or 4 rooms in the future, because you're not even there yet. So you don't need to worry about loading in, let's say, assets of a corridor when you're like 4 doors away from that corridor. The SSD doesn't even have to worry about its, this. And what this basically means is that while the consoles only have 16 gigabytes of memory, what you're effectively doing is multiplying this quantity, because you don't need to worry about having data for things which aren't relevant yet. You're basically, it's essentially like saying, well, you know what? Imagine having like a very simplified example of this is, imagine having like a storeroom, and you have that storeroom be, let's say, I don't know, 50 square feet, nice, easy kind of example, and you're trying to lease that out to someone else, or a couple of other people, and they are trying to store that, their items for a good amount of time, but you can only have like 2 people that are renting that space, because you've only got 50 square feet to rent out. It's not much. Now, what you could do is you could say, well, I'm gonna like knock down the wall there, and it'll extend it to like, 75 feet, which is a bit like the Xbox One X to Series X in terms of raw data. Like, it's gone from 12 to 16 gigs. So let's just say, you get about 75 feet or so. So it's pretty decent, but ultimately you probably wouldn't be able to have that many more people. However, if those folks basically said, well, you know what, I only need to store Monday and Tuesday, Bob over there only needs it Wednesday, Tom only needs it Thursday, Friday. In other words, they were fetching the stuff out. You could rent to way more people. That's a very crappy analogy, but what I'm basically trying to say is, because the data can swap out so much, you can balloon the size of the assets way more in the memory, because you don't need to worry that you need to store so much more of those assets, because by the time you're kind of done with a specific area, let's say you're playing, I don't know, a racing game, by the time you've gotten like a part of the way around the track where the previous assets are kind of getting out of view, by that point, those assets can be either removed entirely or swapped out for lower detail objects or textures. So this is why it's so imperative to have fast transfer speeds for these next generation consoles. We did actually go over this rather extensively, funnily enough, with Matt Hargett, and also we were talking about this as well with Bob Duffy from Intel Graphics, with Bob and Matt, who is a Roblox developer. He was working on the PS5, and we were going on to like, nanite and being able to swap data in and out of the SSD really fast. So if you want to check that out, it was on the recent podcast we had. We'll be doing a lot more podcasts on the channel. I've already got a couple of guests in mind, so I think they'll be really cool. I actually have another interview on Tuesday, he says, thinking. Yeah, Tuesday. With someone else from the Kronos group. So Neil Trevitt, who's going to be back on, and he's going to be discussing a lot of cool stuff with the Vulkan API, and also what Kronos have been working on. So if you're interested in that type of thing, you should check that out as well. With all of that said, I think that's just about it for this video. The normal stuff, if you've enjoyed it, like, share, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.